equipment. We're going to be covering off on all the changes that essentially affects the wider industry. So some of these changes include flame failure being mandated, new temperature limits for zero clearance installations, some new requirements for high temperature cookers, otherwise known as Chinese pig and duck ovens, and also some new requirements for mobile serving appliances, otherwise known as Chinese steamer trolleys. So flame failure on all burners. So AS 4563-2004, the current version, only requires flame failure on enclosed burners. So any exposed burner, like an open burner, it's currently not a requirement. So if we've got an oven range, a barbecue, a griddle, anything where it's enclosed, we currently require flame failure. Under the new draft, all burners will require flame failure, and that includes the supporting pilot for that burner, if it has one. There's new temperature hazards test at zero clearance. So to step back a little bit, there's been fires occurring within walls behind equipment. It's a short distance above the flue terminal. Investigations have found that the issue is occurring due to hot flue gases impinging on the wall. Therefore, the new clause 5.5.6 and test method B27 will require the appliance to be specifically zero clearance tested, and that the temperatures of the rear surfaces adjacent to the catering appliance shall not exceed 200 degrees. So if we see just the example there of what's actually occurring, is we're simply getting that short amount of distance above the flue terminal, we're getting extremely hot temperatures, which is transferring through the wall and creating an unsafe situation. Where an appliance doesn't comply, solutions may be chosen in line with similar effect in order to comply. What I mean by that is the manufacturer may choose to fit a flue deflector, which will direct the products of combustion into the canopy away from the wall. Manufacturer may choose to reduce the temperature of the flue, and that would be achieved by reducing the heat capacity of the product. And the other way is to move the appliance forward, place a spacer at the rear of the appliance, and that again will mean that the products of combustion won't impinge on the wall.
Jono,
now on this particular...
with the deflector, the heat.
So we'll hold the questions till the end of this particular part of the presentation, but with this particular method, where a spacer is used to comply with this requirement, the spacer is required to be a permanent component of the appliance. In other words, it needs to be fitted to the appliance ex-factory. When it's unboxed, it's already fitted and it can't be removed. Otherwise, it defeats the purpose of this means of compliance. The next one is the high temperature cookers. So in other words, the Chinese pig and duck oven. So the high temperature cookers were previously not covered in AS 4563. The draft of AS 4563-2021 now covers the high temperature cookers under a specific section, which is section 17. The specific requirements include the maximum operating temperature shall not exceed 400 degrees Celsius. Over temperature protection is required to ensure that it doesn't catch fire. And there are some strength requirements. So there's an applied load test, which essentially works based on the manufacturer's maximum rated load. And that would be plus 20% of what the manufacturer has declared. So if the manufacturer says it can carry 100 kilos, then it will be tested with 120 kilos. For appliances that have a multi-tier section, like the one on the screen, each of those sections must secure to the base. So in other words, it can't come apart and pose a potential issue for a customer. There's also a stability test that's required, and that's the maximum load that the manufacturer has specified in any arrangement. So these appliances generally will have a ring located below the top section, and the ducts are hung along that ring all the way around. So if the manufacturer has specified 100 kilos, we'll be pushing them all into any arrangement to make sure that the thing is stable and it won't tip over. In addition to the requirements mentioned, all the general requirements are also applied to that appliance as well. Mobile serving appliances, otherwise known as yum-cha trolleys or yum-cha steamer trolleys. So they also were not previously covered in AS 4563. So the draft of AS 4563 now covers the mobile serving appliances under the specific requirement of section 18. The specific requirements include, under stability and mobility requirements, there is a limitation on the smallest size of caster, which is now 95 millimeters in diameter. It's got to be equipped with auto braking as well, because these appliances are essentially moved through dining rooms of restaurants. If there are any forms of ramps moving between adjacent levels of that dining room, we need to ensure that it isn't going to roll out of control and hurt patrons within the dining room. We also had to put provisions in for a cylinder compartment, because no catering equipment to date has a cylinder compartment within it, nor are they allowed to contain a cylinder. So for this particular appliance, we've had to incorporate requirements for a compartment. The compartment can only carry one 4.5 kilo bottle of LPG or cylinder and must be restrained. So there's requirements on that. There's also requirements on ventilation openings so that the gas can dissipate if there was a minor gas leak, or if there is a small amount of gas from replacing a bottle, that it can dissipate rather than accumulate and remain in there. There's also a requirement in there for internal separation between the burner and cylinder compartment, so that if there was a small amount of gas there, it won't ignite. Over temperature protection is also required. Reduced surface temperatures was another one that was included. So the temperature hazard requirements for catering equipment are quite higher than what a domestic product would be. And that's due to the nature of the appliance. Commercial appliance has a high heat output. In this particular instance, this appliance is intended to be in a dining room. Patrons that will attend that restaurant will be of all ages, from young kids through to the elderly. And if somebody does brush past this appliance, we can't afford for them to be severely burnt. So the surface temperatures were reduced for this particular product, in line with what the domestic products would be. We've also have a requirement in there for a tip over switch to shut the burner off should the appliance tip over. There's also provisions there for a manual isolation from the external of the appliance, and that's to ensure that if something does go wrong, the operator can isolate the gas supply from the external of the product. And in addition, the combustion results, so we've reduced the CO2 ratio limits to what a domestic appliance would be, which is 0.01 after 15 minutes of ignition. In addition to those specific requirements, all general requirements will also be applied to the appliance. So just to summarise what I've just covered on AS 4563, now there are some other things in AS 4563 that have changed, but there is really no point me raising them with you because they are very technical and they won't have an impact on your business. Essentially, we've included some new technologies in there which have been used in the catering industry for some time now, and were never covered within the standard because it is 17 years old, but it does not have an adverse effect on your businesses. But nevertheless, this is essentially what you will see different. Just to summarise, so we've covered off on flame failure being mandated on all burners, the zero clearance installation requirements, high temperature cookers, and we've covered off on the mobile serving appliances. So I will open it up now for any questions on those topics.
Yeah, I have a question. We install commercial kitchens. We actually make up a flue diverter at the rear that we mount to the wall, have it about 80 to 100 mil off the wall. That allows the equipment not to push hard up against the wall. Is that acceptable? Seems to be getting signed off at the moment.
So in theory, with a flue deflector, you need to have it tested with the appliance. And the key reason being is if the flue deflector does restrict the flow of products of combustion flowing out the flue way, it means that you may have results of front spillage or incomplete combustion. So it should be tested by the laboratory and it's obviously got to be certified as well. So in theory, it should be tested and certified with the product. So in other words, it needs to be also provided with the product as well, so that we're getting a consistent result. So the flue deflectors will vary between products. You'll notice that a lot of atmospheric deep fryers, so atmospheric means that it doesn't plug to power. It uses the rising heat to create the draft, and then that's how it brings fresh air into the burner. So,
well, I'm probably wrong in saying a flue diverter. It's more like a permanent spacer, like you were explaining before, where we fix it to the wall, and then that creates that space or that distance, allowing your flexible connections rear, so you don't squash pipe work and so forth.
And if that's the case, that there is no problem with that. A spacer or a bumper for the appliance to stop against, there is no issues with that. No testing would be required for that. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, Paul, I've got a question. Andrew from MTD. How much of this has been signed off by ESV?
Well, this is actually the appliance standard. This isn't, when you say it's signed off by ESV, you mean the writing of the standard?
Yeah.
Well, ESV...
Are they going to object? Or are we going to have to put you and them in the same room?
No, there are members from Energy Safe Victoria.
Yeah. So Energy Safe Victoria is a participating member in the standards development process.
Okay, so my other question was, we've designed and nominated heat deflectors that Vince was talking about for the last 30 years. And I haven't known of... What's that?
Sorry. There's a bit of...
I haven't known of any issues to do with...
I'll just mute
Okay.
Who's the cat?
So we've in all of the installations that we've seen, similar to what Vince was talking about, there has not been any issues to do with fires, and it seems like most of the issues have mainly been to do with... Is that me?
I think it's your reverb coming through. Yeah.
Larry's computer keeps flashing sound whenever that sound comes on.
Maybe try muting, Larry. Although I can't hear you, but I don't see you on mute. Anyway, continue, Andrew.
Yeah, I was just... If it continues, I'll stop. Yeah, we've successfully designed and had installed heat deflectors behind cooking appliances that have prevented any distortion of walls, fires, and all those sorts of things. And I suspect that a lot of the things you're trying to cover off on are when these imported products that have no standards or no testing in Australia overheat. So when you're saying they must be tested with the appliance, 20 years installation with no incidences must account for something.
So I might jump in there.
Yeah,
Tyler Mason from Energy Safe Victoria. What you're describing there in terms of...
I'll turn mine off.
That's right. Somebody's not on mute. What's happening there is a feedback loop. Their microphone is picking up what's coming out of the speakers. But what you're describing is a means to ensure that the manufacturer's installation clearances are maintained. Now, what we're now talking about is testing an appliance with zero clearance for installations. We're all aware that the practice is to where there's a fire-resistant material, you can reduce from the manufacturer's installation clearances to zero. That scenario isn't adequately controlled in the standard. So up until this point, there's been an assumption that an infinite level of protection is provided, and that is not the case. So the other change that pairs with this zero clearance 200-degree limit is an increase to the level of protection afforded to an installation under the installation code. That corresponds to 200 degrees Celsius. Now, the described situation where part of the kitchen is constructed to maintain those clearances, that's fine, and that's going to continue to be fine. However, if an appliance requires that to meet the 200-degree clearance or test requirement, then that has to be part of the appliance. So an appliance installed with 0 clearance can't heat an adjacent surface to 200 degrees.
That used to be anything that had a combustible.
Yes, yeah, I am talking about the protection of combustibles.
Yeah. So where an appliance is actually installed up against the wall, and there is the appropriate stainless steel lined with the material as we would specify that does comply with ESV, we believe that there should be no need to create that 50 mil gap.
So I'm perhaps misunderstood the question there. If you've protected the surface and it's been tested to this new requirement to ensure that it doesn't heat a surface more than 200 degrees, which is the level of protection the installation has, that's fine.
So what Vince is showing you there on his phone is a 50 mil spacer or an 80 mil spacer with a gap at the back. Do we have anybody from the health department here saying that that's an acceptable installation? Because you'll find that they will reject that.
I don't know. Paul, is somebody from one of the health authorities on the line?
I don't believe so, no.
What we found in all of these cases where we've been trying and working with contractors like Vince, the best contractors in Australia struggle to satisfy your codes as well as the health department. And if you aren't going to talk to each other, we're all wasting our time. The health department states it must be either mobile or sealed to the wall and no gaps, minimum 150 mil.
Can I just jump in there?
Yeah.
So what I've shown, this is just the installation I'm on at the moment that we've put in. So that's 80 mil, Andrew, for your information.
Yep.
So that allows the reg and isolator at the rear and the flexi connection to the piece of equipment, so that for health department, I've found that this piece of equipment can be moved out. Infill benches and so forth can be moved in and out for cleaning purposes around the items. And then also it allows, it keeps ESV happy with when we're pushing it back, it's not squashing your gas hose and causing any crimping in the hose and so forth. And I find regardless of what we've got in here, which is a proper fibre rock at the moment, that wall's going to overheat and burns the stainless. I prefer, as a kitchen contractor, we always prefer to put the spacer in because it just protects that stainless wall. And then this is the only way we seem to get away with the health department, that the equipment can be moved essentially for cleaning.
Yeah, that doesn't necessarily suit all installations though, does it, Vince?
No, if you're putting it on a plinth like you guys like, then yeah, that makes it, well, we just got to cork it all in, I suppose.
Yep.
And
With
it's
no
hard
gaps.
piped. Well, hard piped in and all corked in, still have that space of the same.
We're going to be covering off on gas installations in the next few slides, but they do cross-relate, obviously. Is there any other questions before we move on? No? Okay, so we'll proceed through to 5601. Okay, so the draft of AS, sorry, actually, I'll just take one step back first, just back to the other one. So the public comment is open and can be submitted up till the 20th of July for AS 4563, the appliance standard. You can get a link to that on the invitation that you received for this webinar, if you wish to submit a public comment. Okay, so the draft of AS NZS 5601.1 is also out for public comment, and that's for gas installations, and it is the general requirements. So in this particular draft, they will prohibit the use of semi-rigid connectors for gas installations of commercial catering equipment. There are new requirements for freestanding commercial catering equipment with under equipment connections. There's also new requirements for the connection of freestanding commercial catering equipment using a hose assembly. The grease filter clearances table has also been updated and includes more appliances. And there's also new requirements for commercial catering equipment in classrooms. And finally, there's new requirements for thermal protection of combustible materials adjacent to commercial catering equipment, which we sort of just touched on a little bit when we're talking about the appliances. Okay, so we'll kick it off with the semi-rigid connectors. So yeah, so semi-rigid connectors are previously allowed to be used on commercial catering equipment. In this version of the draft, it is now said that it can no longer be used for commercial catering installations. Freestanding commercial catering equipment with an under equipment gas connection is no longer allowed to be connected with a gas hose directly to the under equipment gas connection. So essentially it needs to be, the pipework needs to now be relocated before a gas hose can connect to it. And you can see some examples there of what the issue appears to be. Connecting freestanding commercial catering equipment.
Paul, sorry to interrupt. Could you just go back one slide and explain that with the semi-rigid, why that decision is being made or tabled?
We will. I don't know the entire answer to that. We do have members of AG6 present, which can answer that question. But we will. It would be best if we cover it off at the end. There is a question for everyone. Just
make sure you cycle back to it because that seems crazy. There would have to be some really cool reasons. Thank you. Yep.
No worries. So connecting freestanding commercial catering equipment using a hose, and this is under clause 610.27. So where freestanding commercial catering equipment is connected with a hose assembly, the following shall apply. So the appliance shall be designed and certified for that connection. In other words, what that means is the appliance must be tested with a hose assembly and it must meet the requirements of supplying a hose assembly. Now, what I mean by that is if the appliance is certified on casters, it must be certified to be installed with a hose assembly. If the appliance isn't certified for casters, then the hose assembly is a secondary thing. So that's the first point. The second point is the appliance is designed to move on casters or rollers shall be connected to the consumer piping using a hose assembly, obviously, for obvious reasons. Sorry, somebody hasn't muted their microphone.
Andrew Carson.
Okay, and so I'm sorry guys, I just flicked the slide by accident. The height of the consumer piping connection above the floor shall be approximately equal to the height of the connection point of the appliance. So if you have a look here, these two red lines with arrows, essentially the consumer piping here, the connection point to the hose and the connection point at the appliance height needs to be roughly the same so that we've got an even distribution of a bend in that hose. On the same clause still, both connection points shall be facing downwards. Where an appliance having a mass greater than 20 kilograms and fitted with casters, rollers or wheels or designed to be slid out for servicing is connected by a hose assembly, the extent of movement of the appliance shall be restrained by means other than the hose assembly. So that means the restraint, if you can see the chain there on the top, that must be 80% or less of the total length of the hose so that the hose itself will never be strained. And the other point, I'm not sure if I covered, is the 150 mil distance between the two connections so that when they are pushed together, the hose can remain in the arched position. With the hose assemblies, they shall be certified to ASNZS 1869, Class B or Class D. Means shall be provided between the rear of the appliance and the adjacent wall to prevent damage to the hose assemblies and components when the appliance is in the installed position. With the appliance in the installed position, no part of the hose assembly shall be less than 50 mil from the floor or ground. And lastly, a quarter turn manual shutoff valve shall be located at the consumer piping connection point prior to the hose assembly. And that's what you can see circled there. There is an isolation point at the consumer mains end. The next topic we're going to cover is clearance to grease filters, which you may or may not be familiar with. This is table 6.10.2.2 out of the new draft. It was previously known as table 6.9, and this has had a serious overhaul. So firstly, AG6 have included a new column to the table, which says heat source to grease filters. And this is simply to clarify why these numbers have been provided. So as a 200 mil clearance, we've got low intensity indirect flame, kebab cookers, salamanders have been included now, chicken rotisseries have been included. Permanent concealed flame. We've got solid top or solid flat top, griddle / grill plate, deep fryer, pasta / noodle cooker, even heat top. We've got naked flame, indirect cooking. This has got a clearance of 1,050. We've got gas hot plate. Hot plate is a domestic term, but it has remained in the installation code. Open burner or open top burner, we refer to them as sometimes. Stock pots, targa tops are 1,050 as per the draft. And intense naked flame, where flare / ignition of food typically occurs. So flaring type appliances. So we've got the Chinese cooking tables or wok burners, appliance with user interchangeability or open grill plate, barbecue, broiler, including char, radiant, infrared, automatic, and flare types. And that is 1,350 due to the risk of ignition. So just from a visual point of view, so we've got the salamander, we've got the kebab cooker, we've got a chicken rotisserie. It's the measurement on these types of appliances taken from the top of the appliance. I've included the clearances here on the sides. That's a ventilation requirement, not a 5601 requirement. And for range type appliances, it is 150 mils on either side. We look at the next set of clearances, which is 600 mil. We've got the even heat top with oven range. We've got a pasta cooker. We've got the griddle or solid grill plate and the deep fryer. Again, they also have to comply with the 150 clearance on the sides, and they're allowed 600 from the working surface. Then we've got our 1,050 mil clearances for the naked flame, and that covers off for target tops, open burners, and stock pots. And again, they also have to comply with a 150 mil clearance on either side. And finally,
Paul, could I just interject again? Whilst you've got ESV on the line in this seminar, we're having particular issues with 2 projects at the moment where ESV is stating that the target top is...
Yeah, we can come back to this one because it's literally just...
Can you make a note of that and come back to it?
Absolutely, I'm happy to cover off on it. And then finally, we've got the wok Chinese cooking table, the broiler and the automatic broiler, which have to comply at 1,350. The next topic we're going to cover off on is the commercial catering equipment installed in schools and similar. Now, this is broken up into 2 different sections. There's one that actually covers off for educational institutions, and I've also included it in here too because it will be called up on the job. So clause 5291, isolation of installations in educational institutions. The installations now require for a readily accessible quarter-turn manual isolation valve at the inlet of the installation, an electrically operated solenoid valve to supply gas to the installation, an emergency stop button connected to the electrically operated valve with a key operated reset function and operating instructions for the customer. Signage adjacent to the emergency stop button is also required as well. So that would be applicable for a TAFE college where they've got cooking equipment in there. It would also be applicable, for example, a science room in a school. So that there will be used for any educational institution. Clause 61029 is specifically for commercial kitchens in classrooms. And adequate permanent natural ventilation openings shall be provided direct to outside. At least two permanent openings to be provided at high and low level. And the next requirement is the provision of a local exhaust canopy and makeup air system conforming to AS 1668.1 or 1668.2. And the very last topic, which is Appendix B, otherwise known as Appendix C, which is the thermal protection of combustible materials. So severe wildfires have occurred within commercial kitchens, and it initiated a review of how ASNZS 5601.1 protects combustible materials. The review found that the current ASNZS 5601 requirements for thermal protection did not provide adequate protection to combustible materials from the intense heat generated by commercial catering equipment. Therefore, Table B 2.2 in Appendix B has been updated and now provides specific requirements for commercial catering installations. So the criteria for materials adjacent to commercial catering equipment are different and now 250% higher than the current requirements. The current requirements will remain as the other than commercial catering equipment in the table. And you'll see here in this Table B 2.2, you'll see in here there is their combustibles adjacent to commercial catering appliances. There is now a minimum thickness, and the heat coefficient of, the maximum coefficient of heat transfer is actually being reduced to 7.5 watts per meter squared Kelvin. Whereas previously, we were working off what the domestic appliances would have to comply with now, which is 6 mil minimum thickness and a 20 watt per meter squared Kelvin. So moving forward, the kitchen designers and installers will be required to calculate the minimum material thickness required based on the thermal conductivity specification of the product they intend to use. So what that means is there are two examples in the standard, which are currently there. So if we look at example one, there's a fire resistive material from supplier A, and it has a thermal conductivity of 2.1 watt per meter squared or per meter Kelvin. What the minimum thickness of the material should be. So they do their calculations, dividing it by whether it's going into a commercial installation or a domestic installation, and you'd get a result. And in this case, it would be 28 millimeters. In example two, we have a product with a slightly better performance. And again, we do the calculations in the commercial area. In this case, the result came through at 14.6 mil. But as per that table we saw a moment ago, the minimum thickness allowed is 15 millimeters. So 15 millimeters in this particular instance would be required. Okay, just to summarize quickly. So we covered off on the prohibition of semi-rigid connectors, the new requirements for freestanding commercial catering equipment with an under gas connection, the new requirements for freestanding commercial catering equipment using a hose assembly, the updated table for grease filter clearances, new requirements for commercial catering installed in schools and similar premises, and new requirements for thermal protection of combustible materials adjacent to commercial catering equipment. Now I'll open it up to questions. Please go ahead.
Paul, can I just mention as well, there's a couple of questions in the chat box.
Okay.
So if I just go firstly, we've got Christopher Love. We're having issues with ESV treating target tops as a trigger for 1350. Can we get ESV comment on this?
Okay, so we can discuss that. Tyler, did you want me to do this one or did you want to answer it?
I'll field that one. We're stuck with the 1350 because it's written in the standard.
Yep.
So the new version of 5601 proposes a much more reasonable number. If you're having issues and can build and feel that it's not complying with the 1350 isn't required, you are free to submit an application for exemption with supporting evidence.
So
sorry, Tyler, could I just, I'm really confused. Like a few other people on this call have been designing commercial kitchens for over 20 years here in Australia and installations like Andrew around Melbourne, as lots of other people. I think it's an understanding of some of your people about a description. The standard might say, and I'll have to go back and double check it, but in 20 years that I've been doing this, a target top, i.e. a solid enclosed flame with a removable target in the middle, has never been a trigger for a 1350 clearance. I
Some
think
wording
there'll be a
was
few other
added to
people on this call.
5601 in the second amendment in the last few years, and I believe personally that it was a mistake and it should have been entered under a different category. However, that's what it says. Table 6.9.
That's it. It was added in 2016, and in a similar boat, I've been involved in one installation in the last few days, and to my surprise, I actually didn't know it was included in 2016 because of the way the amendment was published by the publisher. The way it was included, it wasn't actually added in the amendment as a clean, fresh table. It literally just said add the words target top before Chinese cooking table. And so I didn't actually even find it based on the way it was published. It was only recently when I saw a more up-to-date version of that table sent to me where I actually identified that it was included at 1350, and hence why it has caused so much confusion amongst installers and even myself. So there.
So
Can we say then
the-
that it's, sorry, Chris, is that then the ignorance of those that write the standard? They don't understand the equipment?
I think that was an error by
So the
the
standards
method-
development process is a consensus-based process where everybody is at the table.
But it's obviously wrong.
it was
And
Sorry.
in addition to
I
everybody being at the
just
table, it goes out for public comment, and everybody in industry is free to submit comments. So
Can I just point
there isn't a
something
lot
out
to
with
be
that
gained from
particular table?
trying to apportion blame on this.
No, I'm not interested in blame, just trying to avoid these issues when someone's paid good money for a piece of equipment, but the person who's assessing it doesn't actually understand what it is.
and
So
Andrew,
in the scenario you've just described, the person assessing it is as constrained to the requirements of the standard as anybody else in the discussion.
Sounds like duck shoving to me.
yeah, so Andrew, the reason why I'm running this webinar is because of these sorts of things that have occurred in the past, and industry members haven't been informed of the changes when they've been out for public comment, and hence the reason why I pushed hard alongside with my constituents on this subcommittee to have this forum open up and everyone have an opportunity to see what the changes are before they're called in. And then you can submit a public comment and the committee can review your comment and can take action accordingly if required.
No problem. I've actually spoken with the guys at ESV and been in their offices personally and spoken to the guys there. So it's not like I'm not averse to actually having the conversation, and do support everything that you guys are doing 100%. And the only way it is resolved is by opening it up like this. So I'm not interested in laying blame, but as Chris has pointed out, when you know what the equipment is, you then assess it on the basis of what it is and why it's installed. And a target top does not have an open flame.
No, correct. Correct.
I can add it. I can add it to the part 86 that this specific table has been a knowledge test using for a while, and that's why this work in. And actually, as the manufacturers, we submitted a table for that review with the additional clarification.
Can't hear you, Wes.
Yeah, Wes, this is really unclear.
Okay. Is it better now?
So Paul, yeah, that's better. So Paul, you're saying this table here, a target top is 1050, but ESV are saying it's 1350.
Well,
It's current standard as it is currently in force. It's got that 1350.
This table is being changed very significantly in the current version. This is not what is in the current published version of the standard.
So could I suggest then that there's been lots of kitchens installed throughout Melbourne in the last 4 to 5 years? So you're saying that this was introduced in 2016, where we've installed target tops, that this has not been enforced? The 1350 clearance.
Well, as I pointed out, I wasn't even aware of it up until 2 days ago. I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago. And it was because I found after it was pointed out to me in a clean public or publicated version, my version didn't show it. And the amendment only said to add the words target top before Chinese cooking table in tables 6.9. So it didn't say 1350 clearance requirement for a target top. It just said add the words target top before Chinese cooking table.
Can I mention something about that particular table? It doesn't say target top, comma, Chinese cooking table.
It doesn't.
It says a target top Chinese cooking table.
Correct.
Which is a
also-
wok burner.
Correct. So I don't understand why they're attacking target tops. It's just an unfortunate choice of words here.
Yes, that's why this current proposal in the draft is there for that reason, to clarify that, because we found that confusing too, and that's why we decided to participate and raise the voice and try to clarify that.
I mean, the good news is that we've addressed it within the table, so we should overcome these problems moving forward.
So is there an opportunity for the interim between now and when this document is released, that for any installations that are out there, that there is an exemption when
If there is-
ESV are assessing this in Victoria? Because I think it probably needs to be addressed as an exemption to the regulation, because it is an acceptable misalignment.
There is online exemption, Andrew, where the gas fitter can apply directly. That has been online for, I'm not sure, but at least a few months.
There's a similar issue, Andrew, with the table for griddle. The word griddle appeared in the 1350 requirements in the old table as well, and we all know that the definition of griddle means a solid piece of metal, but it was again misplaced in the 1350 area. And if you had the word griddle on your appliance, they were calling it up at 1350 because it says it in the standard. So it's a similar thing with that as well. And again, that's been corrected.
Yeah. Can we just ask Chris, can you mute please, Chris? Thank you. I do have another question, and I'm not going to go on. I'll just ask the question. If all of these issues are to do with the distance between the potential flame and the filter, why not just ban aluminium filters in Australia, and because they've been banned throughout Asia?
It's not so, I don't believe it's so much the aluminium filter that's the problem. I think it's the accumulation of grease, which is the concern. So
it's a maintenance issue and not necessarily the filter. So isn't that more to do with maintenance than that? But I think if you look at throughout Asia Pacific, they're saying stainless steel baffle filters as opposed to aluminium mesh filters.
Again, because 5601 can't cover off on filters, that would fall under 1668, which is the ventilation code. It would be more appropriate for that committee to be addressing it. It's outside of our committee's working area. We unfortunately can't work on that.
Yeah, we can add that to Paul. I can add that to that this table has been made part of the work, and the numbers come back. They've been the same as in currently AS 1668.2, which is the ventilation code, and that's why so the committee tried to align both standards together.
So in the case there of an engineered solution that has got stainless steel baffle filters, is any of this relevant? Or are you going to try and apply your clearances to an aluminium filter and make it applicable to a stainless steel filter?
I suggest to put that in public comments and probably try to participate in the ventilation code.
Okay.
Committee or through the ventilation.
I don't mean to hog the whole webinar, but I've got another question in relation to schools, where you're talking about ventilation over commercial cooking appliances within an education facility. Does that apply retrospective, where there's schools that have got no canopies over commercial cooking equipment and inadequate gas connections?
I'll hand that over to you, Tyler.
Sorry.
Is it retrospective? If we go into a site and see that it's wrong, there's no canopies and no correct gas installation, is that something that we are obliged to report?
So I have to admit, I hadn't given consideration to that question beforehand. If you are required to do work, you have to do it to the current standard. If you are called in and you see that installation, you're not required to bring that up to the current standard.
And then when the next week at school catches on fire and kills 5 students, I'll leave that with you.
I'm happy to answer that. It's David Crew from Energy Safe. The standard in the preface of 5601, there is a statement in there that suggests that the current standard, so if we're currently working under the 2013 standard, that it cannot be applied retrospectively.
So in other words, Andrew, you're on mute, Andrew, but in other words, if it was approved to a previous standard, it doesn't need to be rolled into the new standard unless you're doing a modification to the installation.
There's a, isn't there a safety that we're obliged to raise to ESV and say, what's the point of, if you're going to apply new rules, that you're just going to allow something like that to go unnoticed?
Well, the thing is that as long as it complies with the previous standard, it should be okay. But if it's not complying with the previous standard, then there's obviously a reason to be concerned.
Let's say, well, are you then making improvements to the previous standard or just trying to make things more complicated?
As Paul suggested, say for argument's sake, if the work that we're talking about is compliant to the 2004 standard, and then we walk in there today under the 2013 standard, as we suggested, it's each standard is not retrospective. If there is an obvious safety concern, well, then obviously we want to hear about that. But if it's proved, if there's information available that it was approved to the 2004 standard, which doesn't meet the current 2013 standard, and you are not working on that part of the installation, then as we suggest, it is not applied retrospectively.
Okay. I just think you're focusing on trying to prevent places from burning down and applying new rules, but ignoring those things that are going untouched. I probably don't need to talk any more about it. I'll let you continue with your presentation.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew, that's just the way standards and rules work. There's other things out there where you could have a 30-year-old griddle plate with no flame failure and it's still in good condition. You can reinstall that because it still complies with the standard it was certified to 30 years ago. You're allowed to do that.
No, I realise that, but I'm referring to something that is specifically an education facility and has new students turning up every year and thinking that that's completely normal, along with a school and an education department that believes that what they've done is correct. But that's not the subject of today, so I'll let you guys keep going. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
We did have another question in the chat. Flame failure means thermocouple only or thermocouple plus pilot flame?
It depends. You don't need the pilot. So, and a thermocouple is one type of flame proving or flame failure. So there are different means of achieving flame failure. So thermocouple, so you can have a burner, for example, with a thermocouple without a pilot assembly, or you could have a burner with a pilot assembly and a thermocouple. So it doesn't mean that you have to have a pilot, no. Do I have any other questions?
Paul, Rob Wood, just want to check something with you regarding service. I mean, picking up on what Andrew had to say, correct me if I'm wrong, but if a service agent actually conducts service on a unit that does not meet the code,
yep.
My understanding is the service agent effectively is responsible to report and or shut that piece of equipment down. Is that correct?
Yeah, that'd be correct. If there's an unsafe situation and a gas fitter is at site, they are held accountable to make it safe.
Even though that they were not involved with the installation, so it could be an installation that's 2 or 3 years old. They come on site and conduct, some form of a service on that appliance. My understanding is they are technically liable.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks.
No worries. Any other
Well-
questions?
Or can I just add to that from an ESV perspective?
Thanks.
And it's very difficult to hear when there's a bit of feedback coming through the system, but we don't expect at ESV for a plumber to stand there and duke it out with the person in charge of that installation in regards to isolating an appliance if they've not been called to look at that part of the installation. What we would expect is that they mention that to the operator, and if they're not willing to do anything about it, then the next call that they make as they walk out the door would be either to the VBA or ESV. And then we would approach them and suggest that they do something about it, or if that's not the case, take action.
Excellent. Thanks, Dave, for clarifying that. So, Rob, in answer to that question, yeah, it's not fully on the gas fitter to enforce it. As they've got a second avenue where they can potentially ring the Victorian Building Authority in Victoria, or the other state regulators if they're in another state, or Energy Safe Victoria if they're in Victoria. So, excellent. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, Paul, I was going to answer the question regarding AS 4631. Why are they no longer used to, or can be used to install appliances?
Yep, so that's the semi-rigid connectors, guys. And just introducing Ross Jamieson, the chair of AJ13, that writes all the component standards.
And look, thanks, Paul. And look, the discussion that occurred back when we revised the standard, that standard used to be called semi-flexible connectors, because they were, and and we changed it to semi-rigid because those components are only tested to 30 cycles. So as long as they comply to 30 cycles of 180 degrees under testing, then they're suitable for use. So they're intended to be installed to a ball valve, back to another piece of equipment that's then bolted down and never moved again. They're not to be, we saw applications where they were being used as effectively as hoses, and that was never their intent. And that's why the title of the standard was actually changed to semi-rigid connectors, to avoid the perception that they may be a hose. Further to that, there's actually another project that's currently underway, which is looking at ASNZS 1869. And what we are doing there is we are splitting that standard to have a common part for a hose, and then we'll have an elastomeric hose, which everybody knows well and uses on a regular basis now. And then we'll also have requirements for metallic hoses. So a hose is a hose, and a semi-rigid connector is a semi-rigid connector, and they can't be confused about where they can and can't be used.
Sorry, guys, it's Martin from FSDA. I went off air due to internet problems, but I'm not sure where you're going. I think you've gone backwards on a couple of areas, in the connection of the semi-rigid areas. I'm pretty sure Chris and Andrew, we all use service utility stainless steel spine walls. The equipment can be pushed back against that unit and restrained with a restraining stainless steel wire in a clear plastic. The hoses, i.e. Comcator provide, are a smooth, flexible thing. Our specification clearly says non-braided. The photos are showing a non-braided, braided sort of hoses sitting on the floor. And that's the problem with the industry. It's your gas fitters that don't worry about that sort of stuff. So when you're building a standard wall and you're trying to put things up against the wall, what happens as an example, a deep fryer, what fumes don't go up into the exhaust hood or into the chef's face, they go over the back and drop all over your copper pipes and your hoses. By having service utility walls and Vince's flue deflectors like a crown and that, you avoid those problems. By allowing timber in the walls, we stopped timber years ago down at Geelong Stadium and we were told to pull it all out. The other one, the problem I had with the stainless steel spine walls in Melbourne is that even though we could clearly show the gas inspector there was no timber inside the wall, he didn't give a continental. He was concerned about now the electrical cords melting and things like that and creating a fire. So it went round and round and round in circles. And the other one I'm saying is in regards to the target tops. I'm wondering whether you've talked to Moffat and Comcater and Goldstein and Zanussi and all the other suppliers that come into the Australia that have those target stops set up about 900 to 914 to create a different code for whatever. The other 2 points were in regards to schools. Why would they be different to anywhere else? If it's a gas appliance, commercial appliance, they should be applying to the same rules. So I think, you know, you need to have a look at some of those things because your photos show chains. You can't clean chains. And the final one was in regards to your clearance calculations between the wall and that. If you've got 150 something service duct on top of the wall, you're already 150 mil off the wall. But that's irrelevant if behind that wall it's made of timber or it's got structural ply in it or something like that. You're not addressing that by putting in 15 mil thickness. And like Andrew, and I'll probably say Chris as well, we haven't had any fires in all the time I've been in the industry where there's a stainless steel service utility wall.
What I would suggest is to put in a public comment. So there is a link in the invitation. You will be required to register with Standards Australia. Doesn't cost anything. And then from there, you can submit a public comment based on each individual clause.
Well, I will, but I think in the interim, I'm not sure who you're talking to initially, because you're not talking to the kitchen designers, maybe you're not talking to the major manufacturers based on the target top information. And where it goes wrong is when you've got people that just want to install them for the sake of installing it. And your photo clearly shows that shouldn't be acceptable. You know, so this rigid combination is going to cause you guys problems, and it's going to make the cost of installation more. I think you need to get out into the kitchens, and Andrew could probably show you some kitchens in Melbourne. And we can show you kitchens all around Australia like Chris can as well. You know, we just don't do that.
Yeah, I think
that's a defect by your builder, by your gas fitter, by your electrician, by your hydraulic guys, and by the builder not following up on the defects of that particular appliance.
Yeah, Martin, I think it's because in the absence of any specific regulations, the kitchen contractor and say us as consultants, there's nobody who's licensed and nobody has the obligation to comply with the regulation. So while Paul and ESV and everybody is trying to touch on all these things, there is no one authority overriding everything to do with a commercial kitchen installation with all of those appliances. So it's not just this shortfall. It's, as Paul was saying, if you're not dealing with the other standards, it's all standards need to work together. Health codes, fire services, the Australian standards, and ESV. ESV shouldn't be working alone and overriding Australian standards. And what doesn't apply in South Australia and New South Wales, ESV should not have the right to override what happens here in Victoria.
Yeah, but Andrew, their AG6 is the one that writes, is the committee that writes 5601. There are representatives from the South Australian Technical Regulators Office, as well as, I believe, the New South Wales Fair Trading have a representative, as well as, I'm trying to remember what the Queensland Department is now. It was Energy and Mines. I can't think of what, is it Energy and Resources? There's a representative from Queensland as well. AG6 is quite a diverse committee, and they do have the regulators covering all different jurisdictions. I think even Western Australia is on there as well, Energy Safety WA.
The problem is annually a health inspector goes into each property and does a review, right? The gas people don't, the electrical people don't, and the councils that run those things aren't going to bend down and look underneath and see those hoses. They're only interested in the warm waters in the hand basin sometimes, and the fridge is cold. So if you've got nobody inspecting this sort of stuff, and you've got, You got people waving off consultants on projects saying they know better. I mean, what's the point of creating a standard if no one's following? You
Well,
guys have had the most fires. You guys have had the most fires in Melbourne. Put it that way.
Most of them are just done by people who are just selling equipment and it's being
Correct.
installed. It's got nothing to do with us as designers or Comcater or Moffat. So it's faulty installations. It's got nothing to do with what is being designed.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And when I took photos of an installation and sent them to the gas guy in Melbourne, he just flogged me off.
Yeah, they don't care.
And that's why the reason, Andrew and Martin, that's why the reason Paul and myself, we're trying to prepare this webinar to share the information as it is in a draft. So you become aware, and there is still a time now to make your comments in the public comments. Because
we have well and truly been aware for a long time. I'm more interested in sitting in the room with you and have been part of that conversation rather than this debate.
Hey, Andrew, why aren't you wearing a mask?
I'm in my office and I'm the only one here.
I feel sorry for you guys.
Don't feel sorry for us. We're all good.
So it could be the home of the AFL in Queensland again.
Yeah, it just I mean, it is hard, I understand, but yes, it's participation in a committee that the voice can be heard. If there is no participation, no representation, that's that information is just missing on the way to the committee.
I'll put my hand up. I'll join your committee.
Yeah, and let him take you to some sites and show you how it should properly be done. And then you won't have to worry about the thickness of the wall or the density of the wall or what's in the wall, because it'll be done correctly. You know, a lot of plans are given through council. The council sign them off. Sometimes all they care about is it's got a hand basin within 5 meters.
Or a cleaner sink.
Yeah, a cleaner sink, yeah. You know, and some of the canopies that are being installed even today are Dark Ages stuff. You know, I don't know, I'm not judging Chris's age, but I started my apprenticeship back in 81 and I go in a new kitchen and see these filters that are in your scenario and just think, gee, that's Dark Ages stuff. And that's why the government, who set the food standards, who you guys are doing the gas, somebody else does the electrical, and somebody else does that. There's nobody getting together as a group on food standards. The basic food standards is have a hand basin, a cleaner's sink, and then you can do whatever you want.
Paul, I'm just conscious of the time, and I can see from the chat some people are having to leave. So, I mean, we can continue if everyone likes, but I know that some people do have to leave. We do have it scheduled to finish by 4. So I was just going to mention to everyone that, you know, we're more than happy to send through a copy of the presentation. And then obviously on behalf of the NAFES board, we'd like to thank everyone once again for attending. We hope that you found it informative. I can see there was definitely a lot to talk about. We're very excited. We're hoping that this is the first of our many webinars to follow. As I mentioned before, we will be sending through a very short feedback form. And I may also just send through the links that Paul mentioned, which were in the invite for people who want to make public comments, but you will have the link log in through into the website, but I can forward those through again. But I just wanted to jump in, Paul, because I can see from the messages that some people did have to leave.
Thanks, Jim.
But if people want to continue with the questions afterwards, feel free.
Excellent. Does anybody have any further questions?
Paul, I'll just make, as chair of AG13, I'll just jump in here from a standards perspective. It's all very well for everyone to sit in a meeting like this and complain about what's not right and what's not wrong and how things could be done better. It's really important from the process perspective that you actually take the time to actually go through the standard and put in your public comments so it can be addressed. If you don't do it, then don't complain.
Yes. Or can we move to maybe to the thermal protection of the wall? I'm not sure if this subject been a little bit skipped through, but there was no question around that. I'm not sure if the sort of understanding is there of this.
Yeah, which slide did you
And
want?
maybe the table. If everybody understands, we just like to.
So Wes, are you answering the question, can you get blanket exemptions for your target top equipment? So I just wanted to clarify, it's just a bit hard to hear you. Was that the question you're looking at?
No. Wes was covering off another
No,
topic, but I can cover that one off in a moment, Jenny, once Wes is finished.
Yeah, just that table. Basically, in the current standard, there is only one requirement for thermal protection across for all appliances. Now, due to the fires in the commercial catering, this is become different for commercial catering, and the difference is, as it's highlighted. I just thought if we can come back here, just so everybody can see, understand, and see if they got some comments to submit on that subject.
I have a question about that. We currently put 13mm fibre rock on our wall panels behind all our cooking equipment, and my company, we clad our stainless steel spine walls with that 13mm as well, because there's PVC and wires and other things that can catch on fire in that wall, regardless if it's a stainless wall. What product can we buy that's 15mm that's going to meet this regulation?
Of the currently accepted materials, the 15mm and 16mm ones meet this new requirement.
Is that on ESV website, is it, those materials?
So the reason ESV took down information sheet number 3 a number of years ago was that we had become a de facto approver of fire-resistant materials, and we got left holding the bag when some of those materials were found to not be non-compliant, so we no longer maintain a list. The aforementioned supplier of what you're using should be able to assist you.
Okay, but is that changing now because of this 15mm?
So to meet this new requirement, you'll have to move from the 13 to the 16.
To the 16mm, right? Okay. When does this come into play? We're doing jobs at the moment. We've made wall panels just recently. That's obviously not going to be affected for a little while.
Yeah. So this document is out for public comment for a number of weeks or months still, and then it's going to be several months before it is published.
Okay, beautiful. Thank
so
you.
the public comment on 5601 ends on the 10th of June, which is a week away, but there's still a bit of time, as Tyler pointed out, before it will be published.
Right, thanks.
So just quickly, is there anything you wanted to point out, Wes, before I move on to the next question that was in the text in the chat box?
No, fine. I'll just try to make everybody aware that this is different now.
Yep. So just back to the target top query, which is currently 1350 in table 6.9, and it will be changing to 1050. The question was, can we apply for a blanket exemption as a manufacturer to install it at 1050? So that would be a question directed towards Energy Safe Victoria. Tyler or David, are you able to answer that question?
So the short answer is yes. There's an information sheet on our website about applying for exemptions, and if you've got further questions there, we've got a 1-800 number. Somebody can provide you some further information.
Excellent. So the answer is yes. Thank you, Tyler. Are there any other questions? Are there any more in the chat box?
Well, there's a couple more still in the chat box, Paul.
Trying to get the
one with regard to the semi-rigid connectors, mate, and then one from your mate David Magnini.
Trying to find the chat.
Paul, can we have is this the one clarification as to why semi-rigid connectors are now prohibited? Is that the question?
Jennifer's on it.
Yeah, and then there was an added comment on that, and across all states and councils.
No, there's one above it from David Manganini.
Sorry, flexible gas hoses have improved enormously recently. If semi-rigid connections are banned, then does it matter if the flexible hose touches the ground?
David, are you okay to answer this one from AG6? You still there, David?
Yeah, Paul. There's an existing requirement in 5601 that's been there since at least 1995 that any consumer piping needs to be at least 50 mil off the ground, hence why there's a requirement for the hoses to be 50 mil off the ground.
Okay, so it's essentially
why is that the case? Like, is if it's been there such a long time and the product's improved a lot, then why does it matter if it touches the ground at all?
I guess there's no one case that fits all scenarios here. We have to understand that we're writing a standard for a bit of a bit of cord pipe that's being run across the ground, or it might be a hose or a bit of multi-layer pipe. I mean, if there are advances in this technology, well, then now is the perfect time to make us aware of it, is all I can really say to that.
Okay, so David,
look, I might add, whilst some hoses have improved, others have remained very similar to their traditional form.
Aren't they? These products are like need to be laboratory tested, right? So, I mean, couldn't that be part of the process that you ensure that by scratching against the ground, it doesn't actually, destroy the pipe?
So under AS NZS 1869 for hoses are quite rigorously tested, but I would still not lay one on the ground, as in that requirement is there for protection from anything that could be on the ground, from the ground surface, and for any other mechanical interference.
Okay.
For example, somebody sweeping under a piece of equipment.
This is another area between health and codes. I mean, nothing should touch the ground, because if it's sitting on the ground, you can't clean the ground underneath, whether it's a water hose, electrical hose, or a gas hose. So it shouldn't be on the ground.
No, but
So,
yeah,
I mean, the design of the spine walls doesn't allow the cable or the whatever to sit on the ground. The only problem we have is with combi ovens, because the connections are all underneath on big ones. So we have the attitude of best practice rather than following just the Australian standards and the codes. We also add in best practice, and I think that's why you get returning customers back to the consultants, because they do it better than just the end users.
true, but shouldn't the product be fit for purpose?
Yeah, of course, but nothing should sit on the ground. Everything
No, I
should
agree.
possibly
I
be
agree.
150 mil clear. That's the code of the benching and the shelving and all that sort of stuff.
But what about for fixed connections where we used to use a semi-rigid connector? Instead of the old copper pipe going straight to the appliance that you can't move and that's very difficult to connect, what has caused the limited flexibility or semi-rigid now connectors to be forbidden?
I agree. I don't think they should be forbidden.
So the term forbidden is a little misleading. There are applications outside of a commercial kitchen where a semi-rigid connector can continue to be used as an extension of pipework. However, as Ross mentioned earlier, they are only tested for 30 movements. Now,
what about if they're tested for 500 movements, Tyler?
Well, a hose is tested for 7,500. So
Well,
that's a
what's a bit of
flexible
copper
union
pipe
that you
tested
could
to?
use.
What are you comparing it to? What about a direct copper connection? How many cycles is that tested to?
In that scenario, you've got a licensed gas fitter who's making and breaking the connection.
But a
And
licensed
sorry,
gas fitter making the connection.
sorry, that didn't.
The connection is made by a licensed gas fitter regardless.
So, well, you could be using quick connects or other means to move appliances in and out for cleaning.
But you don't.
Also, the restaurant, we see this regularly where appliances are pulled forward daily, weekly for cleaning.
Right. So you're saying with copper they won't be pulled forward or tried to be pulled forward?
Well, they wouldn't have much luck with a rigid pipe.
But the copper pipe has got just as much chance of fracturing as a limited flexibility or semi-rigid connector.
But piping is also required to be restrained and fixed to the structure.
You know, we're going down the line where we're just like the Victorian government, where it just doesn't make sense.
So this is a connection that is expected to be flexible. So we are requiring it to be a flexible component and not a semi-rigid component.
But that gives ease of connection. That's what they're there for.
And you've got the same benefit with a flexible connection.
When you're trying to hook up a copper pipe directly, you've got no access. You're trying to hook up a copper pipe directly to an appliance with no access, little or no access. And it's supposed to be able to be just moved enough so you've got a bit of access and a bit of movement. They're not designed as a hose to be moved in and out, in and out.
So I get that you don't intend them to be used that way. However, that isn't necessarily the reality that's happening out in the real world. People see them as a flexible union, and they may not be designers or I'm talking about somebody who's working and operating in a kitchen.
I've seen connections all around the world, Tyler, and this is the only country that's now disallowing semi-rigid connectors to be used on appliances without casters.
Yeah, Paul, what I'd suggest is you put in a public comment, and yeah, it's the best way to approach it. It's just.
I understand that, mate. I understand that.
Yeah, are there any other questions?
Are we going to tackle braided hoses with that are not fit for purpose in catering conditions?
Well, they're not covered in 5601 because the health department requirements are not covered in 5601. But I think everyone on the call understands that the braided hoses, if I
as shown in that.
Yeah, so braided hoses shouldn't be used in a commercial space where food and food matter will accumulate. So yeah, I think everyone on the call knows that. I mean, that hose there is cable tied to the bottom of the appliance.
Tell that to the manufacturers, because the manufacturers, whether it's a gas appliance or a dishwasher or whatever, supply braided hoses with their actual equipment.
No, actually, in most cases, they don't, which is the problem.
Well,
they should go through testing and be fit for purpose.
A lot of the dishwasher companies supply a braided hose to feed the actual water into the machine.
Yeah, true.
And hand basins are connected with braided hoses. We've been trying for years to get braided hoses out because not one chef carries a toothbrush in the kitchen to clean that braided hose. So there's practical things from history and knowledge. You know, Andrew's really good. So Andrew and Chris in Melbourne I'd be happy with whatever they came up with in regards to sitting down and talking with you guys or showing you a site, whereas what we've tried to achieve as consultants over the time, it's the person that is the D&C person that tries to get away with not doing these things.
There are flexible connectors on the market that have an external coating to prevent harbouring bacterial growth.
That's fine, correct, Tom, but that's fine. We actually use the ones that Comcator supply because they're a smooth yellow hose and they stand out. Whereas other people we get to site, they haven't bought that one because it's too dear. They go and install the braided ones. You know, that it comes down to money. It comes down to money every single time.
And that's where you get back to fit for purpose.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I think that's why the code, you can't give a guideline of this is how thick the wall should be, or this is an example. It should be cross on that hose and cross on braided hose. Here's an example of a hose. Quick disconnect, easy to clean, can pull the equipment out. I mean, we did a number of jobs in Melbourne over the last 10, 15 years, and we're doing more and more now. And the way some of the kitchen contractors get in there and just take shortcuts on everything, and the client has to wear it for life. And when you look at the old ways of doing commercial kitchens, I had to carry on, but there was a lot of plinth mounted equipment. You know, even up here at Jupiter's back in '88, that's what they were doing back then. And then when you pulled something out, the amount of grease between the two units was just there for a fire. absolutely there for a fire, but there's nobody going to site. A health department person will not walk into a site and go, oh, your canopy needs cleaning. Oh, those hoses shouldn't be on the floor. So, you know, it's a round thing to get done. I don't know how you're going to get it done. It's like having federal public councils and state governments. They're all in it for whatever.
That's the challenging part, is it's all covered under different jurisdictions. So the local canopy is covered under local council, you know, in the exhaust canopy. You've got the gas installation, which is covered by the state technical regulator. And it just goes on and on and on. I mean, I could spend 10 minutes here talking about which.
I agree. The Australian standards doesn't cover this to make the hoses off the floor. The Australian standards doesn't say this.
No,
it just doesn't go into it.
Is there something in the NCC volume 1 or 2 that would cover something like this?
It could, but the trouble with the industry is that you've got to go searching for the information. You know, we proved at a hospital in Melbourne years ago, sorry to get off the subject, there was a freezer at the back of the cool room and they have a bell to tell somebody that there's somebody trapped inside.
Yeah.
If you're outside of the cool room, you can't hear that person in the freezer. There was a guy in South Australia, a policeman that died in the freezer a couple of years ago. We had to bark up to try and get freeze. They wanted to put all uprights in so they couldn't walk into the rooms. I mean, the results is just crazy sometimes. Anyway, I won't bore you anymore. I think your salamanders, you've gone backwards by having them up high. You know, too many things went wrong. You know, decades ago, too many things went wrong. And we lowered our benching down to like 600 or 700 and the salamander was put in there. And now you're allowing the salamander to go right up high. They don't clean them. You're going to put chicken schnitzels in there with a bit of cheese and something, oils, you're going to catch fires again.
Yeah, well, with the salamander, that's the minimum clearance allowance, and it always comes down to the canopy. If you're going to an
200 mil, 200 mil is nothing. 200 mil, you haven't even got time to respond to it. And all the information on the exhaust hoods should also be showing that they don't have honeycomb filters. That's dark ages stuff.
That comes down to the Ventilation Code 1668.2 and in conjunction with the National Construction Code.
I thank you for the time. I think it's been great that you've done it, but you know, again, I think you need to talk to the industry people and the main suppliers around Australia, and you know, the Moffats, the Comcators, the Stoddards, the EMAX, and all those sort of people that are Eco Canopy, and all those people, and get them in a room, because some of the codes that are created are just way out there. Absolutely way out there.
Sorry, Paul, you're on mute.
Yeah, I think everybody on standards tries to do their best, Martin. I think all your points are perfect, but come and help us out on the committees. Don't be afraid.
Yeah, no, sure. As I said, I'm happy to sit down, but it's like when I wrote a letter about 5 or 6 years ago to Australian standards, they said you had to write this and you had to fill out these forms. It was sort of like, wow, seriously? Can't we sit down and talk to you? No. You know, and that's the problem with a lot of those scenarios, you know?
Yeah.
So Martin, just out of interest.
I knew the people, sorry, just to finish off, I knew the people that were on the standards to change the exhaust hood standards, and it was solely to capture the steam off 20 and 40 tray combi ovens. So you got exhaust hoods that are no longer 1200 wide, they're like 1600 wide. They still don't capture it. So it hasn't solved anything.
So Martin, out of interest, with the committees that I think it was yourself and was it Andrew, was suggesting that you guys would be interested to attend to discuss. Is this for 5601, the appliance standard, or the component standard? Because we've got members from all committees present in this webinar.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I'd rather take it. I'm a practical person. I'm a chef by trade, like Chris Love is. Now we can take you to sites and go, look at this. This is what we've done to resolve these problems. And I think you find that if you show that wall chart with the equipment up against the wall, It's going to be 50 mil off the wall. You're going to have a copper pipe down there, a flexible braided hose, and all the grease sitting over the back of it. That's what it was 20 years ago when I was a chef at, I won't say where, near Carlton Football Club. And yeah, I'll send you some stuff, Paul, and happy to talk on this sort of scenario, but yeah.
Excellent, thank you. I'm just being mindful of time because we have hit 4:30. Are there any other questions before we close this webinar?
No, mate, all good.
Paul, on behalf of the NAFES board, we'd like to thank you and Wes for putting together this great presentation as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for taking time to attend, and look forward to chatting with you all in the future. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Good work, Paul.
No worries.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cheers.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Cheers.
mate. Cheers.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Wes, Paul. See ya.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Wes.
No worries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, guys.
I will just turn off the
Or do
presentation.
you want me to end the meeting? We've got end it.
Yeah, you can end the meeting now. Excellent.
Okay, then. Thank you so much, Wes and Paul. Again, really appreciate taking the time and putting the presentation together. Excellent.
No worries. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Good to
Thank
see
you,
you.
Jennifer.
Yeah.
Good to see you face to face, Wes. It's been a while.
Yep, exactly.
All right. Right.
you.
Thanks, Jenny, for organising.
That's great.
Take care, everyone. See you.
Thank you.
See you. Bye. Bye, everybody.